welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In the series on economic sociology, in today's lecture, we are going to discuss on the concept of embeddedness as a concept that kind of creates a connection between economy and society. So in the last lecture, we talked about Karl Polanyi and the Great Transformation, where he made an attempt to bring in the close relationship between how the economy and social structures are related to each other. So in today's lecture, we're going to make an attempt to understand further the way in which this concept of embeddedness is central in understanding the transformation taking place in society. So we will talk about how the shift from a traditional pre-market society to a capitalist market society is not kind of contrasted with the reference to economy, but it is more in terms of increasing connectedness, the increase of network, and therefore kind of make an attempt to understand what is embeddedness, what are the different perspectives of embeddedness, and understand Karl Polanyi's notion of embeddedness versus Granovetter's concept, and therefore understand the significance of this concept in economic sociology. To start off, we know that the concept emerged as a pivotal notion in sociology, particularly within economic sociology. So in the first lecture on economic sociology, we trace the emergence of economic sociology as kind of merging the gap between economists who wanted to study economic market institution only from a rational efficiency model versus the sociologists who were trying to understand society from a more social perspective. So economic sociology was trying to create a midway by bringing in the interaction between economy and society. And therefore, this understanding of embeddedness also help us to study social networks. The concept of embeddedness is a midway between traditional economists who regarded economic actors as autonomous and operating in a vacuum driven solely by self-interest, and the sociologist on the other side who saw human action as being regulated by the society and not being very rational. It could be more psychological, it could be more emotional, and therefore this concept is kind of a midway between economists who were kind of overemphasized on efficiency, on rationality, and the sociologists who were trying to understand more mainly from the non-rational, non-autonomous individual. When we look into the concept of embeddedness, it asserts that economic behavior is deeply enmeshed in social networks, and these relationships constrain economic action. Social actors were no longer viewed as autonomous, value maximizing actors focused exclusively on economic gain. And therefore, we see that when capitalism comes in, market is seen as kind of more efficient based, and therefore it was kind of considered as necessary to transit from a non-market economy to a market-based economy, but on the assumption that economists and anthropologists, sociologists were trying to argue that pre-market society were less efficient, they were less rational. Now this concept of embeddedness will help us to understand that it is a kind of a connection which was present in the traditional society as well as in the rational modern industrial society. So the concept of embeddedness becomes relevant to show how economic behavior institutions are affected by social structure. So sociologists have felt that embeddedness was highly prevalent in pre-market society, but gradually it has been reduced with modernization. And in the later part of the discussion, we'll see how Karl Polanyi in the book The Great Transformation would argue that as capitalist society comes in, as capitalism grow, there was not only the need of market but also the need of a state. Why was state required? Because the market would lead into chaos, disorder, and the state was required to kind of regulate the relationship between the workers and the capitalist, and also between capitalists. So therefore, the modern market society were more rational. They were kind of more based on efficiency, rational calculation, and they were less embedded. Granovetter would argue that embeddedness is also found in modern rational industrial society. So, when we see the economic transactions taking place between the pre-capitalist society and the capitalist society, it is the economy. Most of the time we kind of consider it as evolutionary. What marks a different distinction between the two is the economy, the absence of market and the presence of market. Now, when we look into market from say a traditional economist perspective, then market implies a calculated take and give, demand and supply, whereas say in a pre-capitalist society, much of the transactions were taking place on the basis of non-calculation, non-material aspects, and that is why it was argued by a number of anthropologists, sociologists, that pre-capitalist societies were embedded, whereas modern traditional capitalist society are not. Now, when we try to understand embeddedness, we see what does it mean, what is it, and the concept is actually used in kind of a large way to understand the intersection between economy and society. But what does it actually mean? It refers to the fact that economic action is embedded in social relations and structure. According to Granovetter, social relations and structures constrain and enable economic behavior. So, the efficiency is not only in terms of rational calculation, there could be lot of cultural trait, norms, there could be a lot of kind of non-materialistic decision which are taken in for the performance of an economic behavior. So, social relations refer to the social network and ties that individuals have with one another, while social structure refers to the broader institutional framework that shape economic behavior. So, the social relationship could be say between the father and the son, or between the employer and the employee beyond the workplace. But when we refer to the structure, then everything would kind of come into it, included economy and market. So, the social relations and structures have a profound impact on economic behavior, and therefore cannot be ignored in economic analysis. So, a number of times we see that our economic decision, whether we are going to say even kind of a very simple kind of purchase article or a commodity, is not only taken, the decision to buy or not to buy is not only in terms of the price of the commodity, it is also taken on in terms of say the status of the individual in the society, in terms of the expectations and role. Lot of n number of non-material things comes into it, and therefore the economic actions are influenced and impacted by social cultural factors. One of the key implication of embeddedness is that economic behavior is not solely determined by rational calculation of self-interest. So, and this becomes very clear, because if kind of we kind of only think about rationally whether one has the money in the bank to buy a say a product, or is it only for the individual requirement, it doesn't take place. So, instance, a father wants to buy an expensive say a vehicle for his own personal interest, but then he has to think about the expense on the education of his children, on the everyday welfare of the family before he can take this decision. Therefore, it's many a time economic actions are decided by the collective, by the social structure in which one is placed. Economic behavior is shaped by social norms, values and obligations that individuals have towards others in their social network. This means that even when economic actors are making decisions that are seemingly rational, these decisions are still influenced by social relations and structures. So, when many a time we think about how we going to spend depends on the way we are socialized or the way we have been grown up, and therefore many time people think that it is rational calculation, but there could be a hidden conditions which people are not actually aware of. So, when we have understood that embeddedness is basically trying to understand economic relations are embedded in social structures. Now, let us look into some of the perspectives or the ways in which the concept has been used. One is to understand the concept in the pre-market civilization, where we already discussed that sociologists, anthropologists, political scientists and historians, they believe that economic behavior was heavily embedded in social relationship in pre-market civilization. So, there was a kind of a consensus. Why? Because of the idea that market was not grown, the materialistic concept was not kind of integral to the social relations, and therefore economic transaction was considered as secondary. The pre-market civilization, most of the transactions were based on cultural norms, on non-economic factors. The central point is industrialization or the shift or the transition of pre-market society towards market-based society. So, when industrialization or industrial societies are taken into account, economic interactions become more autonomous, driven by rational calculations of personal gain rather than the societal or family obligation. Again, if we go back to the theories of industrialization and its impact on family, on social relations, a number of theorization kind of gives us this evolutionary transition from a society which was non-economic, non-rational towards society which have become more materialistic, the value norms are declining, the significance of family is declining, and theories in sociology also hint towards growth of individualism. The third perspective to understand embeddedness is the substantivist approach in economic sociology, where the contribution of Karl Polanyi is very important. And again, Karl Polanyi would also kind of hint on the idea that as we move to globalized market-based economy, embeddedness kind of gets reduced. So, the term is kind of considered to have its origin from Karl Polanyi's work, and he is kind of considered as the pioneer of using this concept in economic sociology, where he kind of looks into the interlinkage between economy and society, and he did extensive work among the small communities in South Pacific to the political economy of the institution regulating the economy in the 19th century. Polanyi argued that because individuals were always primarily social beings rather than economic ones, embeddedness is a necessary and basic condition of the economy. So, if we kind of go by the assumption that in the traditional society the economy was of less significant, the idea is, or the argument comes in, is that human beings are first social beings. So, even if the market comes in, if the material transaction becomes important, it does not mean that the social aspect of human action will completely get wiped off. In the previous lecture, we discussed in detail The Great Transformation, a work of Karl Polanyi published in 1944. Here, he analyzed the consequences of the 18th and 19th century expansion of capitalism, and we kind of know that he is hinting around 2 or 3 ideas. One is the growth of the market or the economy as the efficiency and more rational autonomic human action. Second is the emergence of the state as a regulatory mechanism, and third is because of this growth of economy and the political institution, there could be kind of lot of chaos, there could be lot of disorder. Polanyi argued that the efforts of embedding society in the market instead of the market in society were ultimately bound to fail, bringing in the wake dangerous societal reaction of different magnitude and character. So, he was kind of worried about the social chaos that there would be in the society. So, anthropologists, historians, they were kind of looking into the pre-market society being dominant by the idea of embeddedness, and the shift from pre-capitalist to a capitalist society is kind of looking into a very meta-narrative kind of a thing, that human action becomes autonomous, rational and organized, which is kind of not necessarily always talks about efficiency, but it needs to take into account the non-materialistic aspect as well. So, Polanyi argued that the rise of capitalism involved political efforts to delink the economy from the social environment. However, this disembedding of the economy necessarily meant changing in social environment and thus society. In a market society, basic aspect of social life would be treated as pure market commodities like the fictitious commodity and human redefined as purely economic rational profit maximizing actors. So, the economists were kind of arguing that human beings become almost similar to the machine, or to my kind of more oriented towards production, and the production was targeted to maintaining maximizing profit. Granovetter, however, turns Polanyi's argument almost upside down and argues that economic institutions in capitalist based markets are also embedded in the norms and social structure. Rational behavior in the social context. Granovetter's central premise is that market actors try to behave rationally but are embedded in social system that structures their market interaction. The second argument is in terms of understanding the relationship between the economy and society from a social network perspective. And this perspective would focus on social networks and personal connections which promote trust and influence behavior. So, the idea that the market is kind of expanding, and what does market require? It requires sellers and buyers. So, basically the sellers, buyers would, or the consumers, distributors, producers, they would enter into a network. Now, the network implies that you are familiar with each other. There is a certain kind of a social relationship between the people involved in a network, and therefore, they would not necessarily lead to disorder, but there would be kind of order in the society based on certain amount of trust on people or involvement of individual in the social network. So, the fourth most important contribution of Granovetter to understand the concept of embeddedness was trust and social ties. Granovetter illustrates this with an example. If someone yells fire in a room full of guests versus a room full of family, the family is less likely to panic due to the trust on each other. Whereas, if you yell in a room, or say in a place where unknown people are there, they are not part of that network, the chances of people kind of not trusting each other and entering into a say they would kind of start taking individual benefit, and therefore there could be a stampede and there could be a violence. So, social network implies that it is the economic transactions or economic actions are based on the trust of the people involved in a network. Granovetter's understanding of embeddedness was further improved in terms of a meta-theoretical metaphor, and this kind of idea of embeddedness was kind of also subject to lot of critical assessment by a number of scholars. One of them was Jukin and DiMaggio, who wanted to offer a corrective extension of Granovetter. He is not kind of rejecting it, he is kind of improving it on the formal understanding of Granovetter, and provides a more social context by distinguishing among different aspects of cultural embeddedness, political embeddedness, and cognitive embeddedness. The structural embeddedness describes the social network that sustain economic relations. It is comprised of the social position of the economic agents, the organization of real market, and other forms of economic exchange. Cultural embeddedness manifests the way cultural assumptions are organized and shared. So, the culture would therefore imply that embeddedness is not kind of a universal or a kind of a across the same. It will be cultural specific. Every culture has its own way to evolve a relationship with the environment, with the economy. Political embeddedness describes the way power dispersion and systematic contradiction of the contemporary welfare state affect economic outcome. So, the economy and the polity are kind of embedded in each other, and the way the market will perform or the way market is going to be respond to the transformation in society depends on the notion or the ideas of the people who form the government or the political power. The fourth is cognitive embeddedness. Cognitive embeddedness refers to the social structuration of world of meaning whose enactment is based on interpretation. The cognitive frames are affected and molded via economic interactions where the intersubject definition of the situations are explicitly or tacitly constructed. In addition, economic policy making takes place at various levels following the guidance of professional economists in academia, industry, or government agency. There is also the idea of differentiation, which Granovetter gives a difference between relational and structural embeddedness. Relational embeddedness emphasizes the quality of personal relationship and trust between actors, while structural embeddedness focuses on the broader network of relationship and the position actors occupy within these networks. Both the relational and structural embeddedness highlight the importance of social ties and network in shaping economic outcome. Now, the concept of embeddedness is very significant in economic sociology and has a number of implications. One of the most important implication is that it allows sociologists to study economic behavior in the social context. So, we are kind of negating the idea that human action is purely autonomous, rational, and purely materialistic. Economic sociology seeks to understand how economic behavior is shaped by social relations and structures, and how economic institutions and processes are embedded in society. The concept of embeddedness provides a theoretical framework for understanding the relationship between economic behavior and social context. One of the key contributions of economic sociology is to highlight the diversity of economic behavior across different social contexts. So, there is no idea that to kind of compare the primitive simple society and say that they did not have an economic behavior. They did have an economic behavior which was kind of contrasted to what was happening in the Western society. Economic behavior is not universal, but it is shaped by social and cultural factors. The concept of embeddedness emphasizes the importance of understanding the social and cultural context in which behavior occur. This means that economic sociology seeks to understand specific social and cultural factors that shape economic behavior in different contexts. So, the cultural variation, the social variation are taken into account. And the most important implication of embeddedness is that it highlights the role of institutions in shaping economic behavior. Economic sociology seeks to understand how institutions are created, maintained, and changes over time. Embeddedness, trust, malfeasance are important concepts in economic sociology that are closely related to the problem of embeddedness. The concept of embeddedness has contributed in comprehending relations between economic action and society. However, we see that in the last decade, a lot of attempts has gone to go beyond embeddedness. For instance, Piri Bourdieu's concept of the field and habitus, it is kind of going beyond the idea of embeddedness, and even for him to explain field and habitus as something that is interaction between society and economy. Economic individuals are actors that are product of social experience, largely unconscious and embodied. And there, we are also kind of moving ahead of kind of looking into the idea of discussing Piri Bourdieu's concept of field and habitus in the coming lecture. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.